Okay. All right, well, good morning, everyone. I would like to go ahead and call this meeting to order. As usual, before we get started, I'll remind everyone that as permitted by the Governor's Disaster Declaration of February 4th, 2022, the determination has been made that an in-person meeting is not practical or prudent for this committee. To ensure that the committee is as transparent as possible, staff posted the meeting materials 1 week in advance. We will provide a recording of this meeting linked on our website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. Starting with attendance, Mary, could you call the roll, please?
Certainly. So committee members who I see on the call right now, we have Kama Dobbs, Dan Burke, President Alice Gallagher, Mayor Leon Rockingham, Jeffrey Shriver, Tara Orban, and Heather Mullins. Are there any other committee members or alternates who I missed?
Yeah, this is Grant Davis. I'll fill in for Kevin.
Gotcha. Thanks, Grant.
Thank you.
All right. Moving on then to agenda changes and announcements. Staff has no announcements, nor are we proposing any agenda changes. Are there any requested agenda changes or announcements from the rest of the committee? Going once, going twice. All right, I see some heads shaken. Hearing none, let's move on to our first item of business, which is the approval of our minutes from October 28th, 2021. Those draft minutes were posted with the meeting materials last week. Before I entertain a motion, are there any comments or corrections to those minutes? Seeing and hearing none, do I have a motion to approve the minutes of October 28th as presented?
Alice Gallagher moves.
Second by Rockingham.
Fantastic. Any last discussion? Hearing none, Mary, will you go ahead and call the roll of the voting members, please?
Yes, Dan Burke.
Approve.
President Gallagher.
Yes.
Grant Davis.
Yes.
Mayor Rockingham.
Aye.
Jeffrey Shriver.
Aye.
And Kama Dobbs.
Aye. All right, motion carries. Moving on to our next item, which is our active program management reports. Mary Weber is going to provide today's overview of the current status of active and contingency projects, as well as highlights from the regional accounting report. So take it away, Mary.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. The two reports included with today's meeting materials are current through the December quarterly status updates, starting with highlights within the Shared Fund Active Program, which are shown in red text. Excuse me, there we go. Lost my notes for a second. Red text in the report. We have the withdrawal of $16,100 in federal funding for the right-of-way phase of Batavia's Prairie Street project in federal fiscal year 22, which was requested by Batavia in order to expedite the acquisition process. Changing the sponsor agency for the Cottage Grove Avenue grade separation projects, phase 1 engineering, programmed in federal fiscal year 23 from the village of Dolton to Cook County. And finally, on the second page, there's a note that the city of Elmhurst has requested reprogramming of the funds for construction engineering from federal fiscal year 26 to 25 to align with the STP locally programmed construction phase. While this request cannot be accommodated immediately due to fiscal constraint, staff does anticipate being able to make this change long before we reach federal fiscal year 25. There's also a new section of the report to track requests for cost increases in federal fiscal year 22. This section is intended to keep the committee and our partners informed of the requests that have been received by staff that we're unable to accommodate right now due to fiscal constraint. As the year progresses, if funds become available due to low bids, obligation remainders, or any other reason, staff will process the requests according to the active program management policies. Once all of the programmed shared funds are obligated for the year, it would also be possible to utilize funds redistributed at the end of federal fiscal year 21 to accommodate the requests. Also new to this report is a section at the end for the federal fiscal year 22 CRISA projects selected by this committee. As shown in that section, these projects are targeting late summer or fall lettings. And then moving to the second attachment, which is the contingency program status report. This is the first report for our just completed programming cycle. Red text in the current status column indicates those projects that were eligible to be included in the contingency list that either declined to be included or did not respond to multiple requests to confirm inclusion in the program. So that completes that report. Are there any questions?
Yes, Mary, thank you for that report. I did have a couple of questions, and so I appreciate the fact that we have started this section regarding cost increase requests. But when I looked at the reasons for the requests, it seemed to me that some of them are not like valid reasons. For instance, the first one just says when the request was submitted, but not the reason for the additional cost for the North Aurora Road project. And so I was wondering if there's more detail to that, or what is the role of this committee with these requests? Is it just to be informed, or do we actually make decisions regarding increases?
So I'll take that one, President Gallagher. This is Kama again. The role of the committee is really only if staff needs to make a decision. So if we've got more requests than we have funding available, and everything was equal about the projects, then we would bring it to the committee to make the hard decision. But otherwise, the active program management policies of this committee allow staff to shift projects in and out based on the availability of funding. So that's also a great comment about the reason for the request, and we will beef that up in the report. So I can't recall specifically what it was about the North Aurora project that caused the cost increase. It may just be they got to the final plans and there were items that were higher cost. I don't think there's any significant scope change, but we will go back and check the records on that and report that at the next meeting.
Okay, thank you, Kama. And then I also had a question, and I apologize, I'm relatively new, so maybe I'm just not familiar with how these are reported out, but in the fiscal year 2022 project report for the shared fund active, Prairie Street improvements is listed twice, and I didn't understand the reason for that.
Sure. That's actually listed twice, once for each phase that has funding programmed in the current federal fiscal year. So the right-of-way phase, which the city has actually withdrawn, and then there's funding for the construction and construction engineering phase as well.
I see. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you for reading the reports and asking questions. Any other questions for Mary or staff? If not, we will move on to the regional accounting update, which is also going to be Mary.
All right, thanks, Kama. So included in today's packet are two accounting reports, one for STP funds and one for CRISA funds. Both reports were updated early last week. Since we are still near the beginning of the federal fiscal year, there's not a lot of activity to report. In the first report, we see that within the shared fund, just under 8.5 million has been obligated so far in federal fiscal year 22. And there's only been the one reprogramming change due to the withdrawn phase mentioned in our previous agenda item. Within the local programs, 15.8 million of the 188 million programmed has been obligated, and about 3 million remains unprogrammed across the region. The second report is for CRISA funding, which you'll recall is only available in federal fiscal year 22. As noted in the shared fund status update, none of the 5.3 million programmed by this committee has been obligated yet. However, within the local CRISA programs, 2 million has been obligated. There has been and will continue to be some active reprogramming within this program as the councils work with sponsors to ensure that the 812,000 that is currently unprogrammed can be obligated this year. And that completes the regional accounting update. Any questions?
Any questions for Mary? All right. Thank you so much, Mary, for those updates. Next on our agenda is discussion, and in the meaty part of the meeting, the discussion of the shared fund methodology. As we know, since the start of the STP shared fund, staff in this committee have been committed to reviewing our methodology following each call for project cycle so that we can address comments, discussions that have been had, and lessons learned in order to improve the process for our next cycle. That next cycle does begin in January of 2023, so we've got the remainder of this year to have these discussions. As discussions progress today, I'd ask the committee to keep in mind that there will be no voting or final decisions made today, and the purpose of our discussion is to provide general consensus-based direction to staff for any items that the committee would like them to research and develop recommendations for later this summer. So we'll also continue the committee's past practice of inviting our audience members to contribute to the discussion with their questions or suggestions. So final decisions on all of the discussions that we have today and over the coming months will be made in the fall when staff presents the application booklet for the federal fiscal year 2024 to 2028 program cycle. So starting with a discussion about eligible project types, Elliot is going to review the memo that was contained in the packet prepared by staff. Elliot?
All right, thank you, Kama. So for this conversation, again, I'll be referring to the shared fund methodology eligible project types memo that's included in today's agenda packet. There are three particular items for which staff would like to initiate discussion today. So first off is a modification of road expansions project eligibility. Second is a clarification of existing project type descriptions. And finally, consideration of new project types eligible to apply to the shared fund. So I'll just jump right in and start us off. We've received public comment regarding limiting or eliminating the road expansion project type eligibility. Now, just as a reminder, this includes through lanes, new and extended roads, new interchanges, or new ramps at existing interchanges. As noted in the memo, there's a balance between project benefits and potential unintended externalities, as well as a need to remain aligned with the region's comprehensive plan onto 2050. Given the varied nature of the region, spanning from urban to rural contexts and unique needs in each area, we want to invite the committee to discuss how best to include or not include road expansion type projects in the future. So I open it up to general discussion. If anybody has any questions right out the gate, go ahead.
What were the reasons for not including this? Did the comments give reasons for that?
So generally speaking, the comments that we received, one was quite short, just don't fund new roads. Another one spoke to ensuring that we control emissions in the region and focus on investments in transit in the region. It is worth noting that these comments came in as part of the comment on the program last fall, in which no expansion projects were actually recommended for funding. So to that degree, we did kind of address the comments, but we did want to make sure that this committee had a chance to kind of fully think about what the comments were, even though they were brief, kind of what we interpreted the intent of those comments to be, and have a chance to consider whether we want to make any adjustments to the eligibility for these projects.
That's an important, oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
An important point to make how the evaluation criteria kind of effectively you know, the wind is sort of blowing against expansion projects, but yet it doesn't preclude them. You know, if there's a way that an expansion project actually helps meet, you know, the various criteria that we have and consistency with the regional plans, then, you know, I suppose it would end up scoring well. But I don't know, maybe this is, again, a thing that's better addressed through our evaluation process than a strict prohibition on a particular type of project. It's more about, does it meet the goals that we're trying to meet?
Right, agreed. I mean, I don't see why one would preclude the other. And, you know, while, you know, bolstering our transit is an important goal, but, you know, sometimes, you know, road expansions also will meet the other criteria, as you said. So I agree 100%.
This is Hunter. I'll just jump in and say that I agree. I think it should remain, even representing transit agencies. Road improvements can benefit bus operations and provide facilities for transit use. So I think it makes sense to include it. I'd support, you know, adding maybe some more limits to it, but I don't think it should be removed as an eligible project category.
Yes, this is Mayor Rockingham. I agree. I think we need to continue to leave this in. And, you know, at some point it might meet the criteria. And a lot of times, and when you're talking about road expansion projects, you're also, you know, crossing among municipalities. So could be some, in some projects, there could be several municipalities working together to relieve some type of, you know, congestion. So to leave this in, I think it would be necessary. Though it's, you know, sometimes it doesn't meet, but, you know, and a road expansion project could also benefit some of the transit, you know, projects also.
Like, Dan, did you want to add?
Yeah, just briefly, I think in terms of road expansion projects, we don't want to incentivize, but it would be inappropriate to preclude. So I agree with the sentiment expressed by the previous speakers.
Okay.
This is Tara Orban. As a representative for the counties, I realize that we are ex officio, but also would like to provide comment on this issue. It is our opinion, in speaking with the other, you know, counties in the region, that we would like to, you know, just building on what everyone said, advocate for continued inclusion of expansion projects in the region. You know, as we talk about promoting equitable solutions, I think there is no one size fits all, which agrees with, you know, the statements everyone else has made. You know, expansion projects, when done right, can be done without degrading the other goals, such as improving, you know, bicycle pedestrian comfort, supporting transit, improving safety. And at their best, they can provide more connectivity, more resiliency in the network, and are built to support land use patterns that we want, and particularly, you know, maybe where auto trips, you know, are required to make the trips. So, you know, I think we all recognize that expansion projects at their worst may make it uncomfortable to travel by any mode, but driving, and wouldn't support land use patterns that are multimodal. But I think the bottom line is, and what I've heard from others today, is that, you know, the counties, we do, you know, support, you know, having some flexibility to implement expansion projects, and we're looking for some flexibility to continue to do so. Cook County, you know, we have an expansion project currently programmed for this fiscal year for our Joe Orr Road extension. It's a tool in the toolbox, you know, and I think particularly in the more urbanized areas like the city and Cook County, it's a tool of last resort. We want to optimize operational performance and safety and access to transit, but, you know, there are some bottleneck improvements, perhaps where you have closely spaced intersections. So, just in closing, we would like to, you know, request that projects continue to be evaluated on context and the benefits provided, rather than, you know, excluding per se the inclusion of expansion projects. Thank you.
Any other comments or thoughts from members of the committee? I do want to, although it's a little awkward in a virtual setting, want to continue this committee's kind of tradition of hearing from the other folks that are sitting in the room, so to speak. So is there anyone in the audience that wanted to add some thoughts? If so, please feel free to unmute yourself, state your name and who you represent and what you think.
Hi, everybody. This is Kyle Whitehead with the Active Transportation Alliance. We were one of those organizations that has been calling for the removal of this project category. I think, I would say a couple things. This is not the only funding source for transportation projects in the region, right? So there are other ways to fund roadway expansion for communities that are interested in doing that. What this is a very specific set of funding that CMAP has the ability to work with municipalities around the region to program, and ideally, those investments are aligned with what's in the regional plan, right? There's not always a lot of levers for the regional plan to be, followed through with these investments. And it's hard to look at any roadway expansion project and consider goals like doubling transit ridership, reducing emissions from the transportation sector. All these things that are really critical in the regional plan run counter to most, if not all, roadway expansion projects. And I think the challenge with relying on evaluation within the current modeling and the current criteria, it's not considering things like induced demand, right? The additional driving that may be happening as a result of the expansion. So when you look at things like safety and impact on the environment, I don't think we believe the current analysis that's happening fully captures the impact of the expansion projects. So just wanted to add those thoughts from our perspective.
Thanks for that, Kyle. Anyone else in the audience want to add their thoughts?
Yeah, this is Mike Clemens from Lake County DOT. Just wanted to echo some of the committee members' statements. We believe that this should remain an eligible project type, and specifically to our case, we have a project that looking at the other eligible categories doesn't really fit anywhere else except a roadway expansion. However, we are realigning an existing county highway around a downtown area in the village of Round Lake. It also includes transit improvements at the metro station, Pace bus stop improvements, drainage improvements on Illinois Route 34, non-motorized bike path connections between the Forest Preserve, downtown Round Lake, and nearby middle schools. But looking at the other categories, this is an expansion project where we're taking an existing 2-lane county highway to a 5-lane section, but rerouting it around a downtown. And so, our cost benefit for this project is 10.5 to 1, with a projected $250 million in benefits for this project. So I think there are a lot of benefits that can happen with these types of projects. But echoing what Tara said earlier, we know we're not going to build our way out of congestion, and in a lot of cases, this is a project type of last resort. So I thought her comments were well said.
Thank you, Mike. Anyone else, or does the committee want to weigh in on the thoughts that we've heard from the audience? If not, I think, the points made by everyone that's commented today are valid. There's definitely a balance between expansion and maintaining our existing system, and that balance is acknowledged in Onto 2050. This committee has done a lot to ensure that we're including complete streets and transit facilities and green infrastructure in our projects and being thoughtful. I think today staff is looking and is prepared to, offer some modifications to road expansion projects if that is the committee's desire, or if the committee feels that, the scoring is good the way it is now, we can proceed through the next cycle and I think continue to talk about this before every cycle that we go through. Continuing to make sure that that the projects that we're selecting for funding are meeting our goals. All right. Well, I see a lot of head bobbing, and as I mentioned off the top, nothing is final here today. We can change our minds in 2 months. We still have quite a ways until we get to the end of the process. So if there's nothing further on road expansions, staff's going to take this as direction to leave things as they are, and I'll ask Elliot to go ahead and move on to that next point in the memo.
All right, thanks, Kama. This one might be a little bit shorter. On to project type descriptions. So we've also recommended clarifying language for project type descriptions from the past call. If you'll refer to the memo, the underlined text are additions to the previous descriptions, and strike-through text are deletions. This will need further revision should additional eligible product types be included or more clarification necessary. But we just wanted to add these clarifying points again from comments received.
Are there any questions on the clarifications being proposed by staff?
I'd just like to say I agree with all the clarifications and additional language.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
I just want to say that, what is this, our second year into our new structure, and it's a learning process. And, I think that at some points, we do have to, clarify some of the wording. But like I say, being that, it's a new direction that we've gone with the scoring and the different projects, I don't see any problem with the changes that have been presented here today.
All right. Well, staff will make those changes for your final approval in the fall, and we'll let Elliot carry on.
Thanks, Kama. So finally, want to cover some potential new project type eligibilities. So the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, now the bipartisan infrastructure law, expanded eligibility for STP funding to include electrical vehicle charging, vehicle to grid technology, protective features, including natural infrastructure to increase system resiliency, and wildlife crossing structures. In addition, no former eligibilities were eliminated. So to this end, staff does not recommend adding these as standalone project categories at this time. Specific federal guidance for these programs is still pending, and no obvious data sources to determine need and project improvements have been identified yet. Also, any new projects must have a sufficient source of reference data from which staff can use to score applications. This data must be accessible, consistent, and available across applicant jurisdictions or geographies. Now, we do, however, recommend that these features be considered as eligible costs if included in an eligible project type. We also recommend further discussion at future meetings regarding the potential inclusion of electric vehicle infrastructure and protected features in planning factor scoring. Finally, staff welcomes discussion from the committee to consider other project types, and we'll prepare background information and solicit suggestions and data sources from our partners at the committee's request. With that, I'll open it up to discussion or any questions.
So it sounds like we're just not ready yet, Elliot. It's exciting, but we just don't have enough data to be able to quantify and score projects. Is that right?
Yeah, to this point, and I know people are getting tired of hearing it, but we're still waiting on specific guidance for some of these programs and determining how they're actually going to be structured and programmed for sure.
But that doesn't preclude the inclusion of it in future projects, right? It's just that it wouldn't be a category type that would be evaluated.
So the main recommendation we were looking at is not recommending these as new project types, but eligible project activities within existing types. Cam, if you want to elaborate on that, feel free.
Yeah, I think, with any new federal bill, new programs, it takes time for guidance to come out. It'll also take us some time once we have guidance to come up with the data sources that Elliot talked about. I mean, this is a very data-driven scoring methodology, and so if we add a new project type, we need to have a way to measure the need for that project and a way to determine what the improvement is, such that we can compare applications to each other. Well, I think we'll have enough guidance to start including scope elements in the next call for projects. I'm not sure we'll have enough guidance soon enough to develop the data sources to have these as standalone projects. So, as we move into the next agenda item, you'll hear me say again, we definitely need to consider sustainability, resilience, electric vehicle infrastructure, but staff thinks it's probably most appropriate, at least for this cycle, to be part of our planning factors in some way. So giving credit to projects for including those elements, and they're definitely eligible for funding to include them, but we don't think we have enough yet to evaluate these as standalone projects. And when we get to August, I might eat my words. Maybe we'll have it, but we're not anticipating it at this time.
It's kind of a slow trickle, the
It is.
information and data coming down then. Okay, thank you.
There are other comments or questions? Any other project types that the committee thinks that we should be including in the shared fund? I know we've talked a little bit about rail yard extensions or improvements in the past. Is that something that the committee would like for staff to dig into?
I don't see why not. Yeah. It doesn't mean that we're authorizing it, but let's see what that would look like.
What do you mean by rail yard improvements, Kama?
So it came up actually way in the beginning of the shared fund program. There's a yard out in the Woodstock area or no yard in the Woodstock area where there probably needs to be one for Metra. That would allow increased capacity in the number of trains that could be run, so beefing up the schedule and the headways on that. And I know that Scott Hennings from McHenry County is on the call too. So Scott, if I misspeak, please jump in and correct me. But it's really intended to open up that capacity to store trains, not just in the yards close to the city, but to be able to store trains out in the further suburbs to allow for increased schedule opportunities. So, one of the issues that we talked about, 2 years ago and continue to talk about is again, how do we evaluate these types of projects? And, is this one unique project in the region or are there others? And so, if it's the committee's desire, I think staff would be happy to work with Metra and the county and the CTA to try and figure out what are the right metrics for these types of projects if it's something the committee would like to consider.
And if I could just provide a little bit of background, this is Scott Hennings from McHenry County. We had asked for this project type to be added, I believe 3 or 4 years ago, and we understand that the challenges and the limitations with the data collection part of this and how it would score against other project types, especially because it is really a one-off type project that's not going to be replicated dozens of times across the region. However, we at McHenry County also realize that there's very few transportation investments that will impact the rest of the region that are made in McHenry County. This is one such investment that really would have an impact, not just in McHenry County, but along the entire UP Northwest line, basically optimizing Metra's ridership, allowing Metra to expand ridership in the future. And really the county is the one taking the lead on building this $100 million rail yard with Metra. And so we would, at the very least, appreciate CMAP staff looking into this a little bit more and coming back with some recommendations at future meetings.
Kama, I wonder if the scope could also expand to include rail yards that are no longer being used, to repurpose them in some way to reduce blight, if nothing else. And I don't know if that's within our transportation wheelhouse, but yeah, that's something, you know, I would consider.
Maybe related to that, is it, I mean, are we talking about just like public transportation or commuter passenger rail type yards, or freight rail yards in the mix? But they're kind of, you know, different animals, obviously, in terms of public versus private and the way they're used.
Yeah, I think within the STP shared fund, we would want to be focused on the public transit. You know, I'd have to dig into the eligibilities to see if improvements to a private freight yard would even be eligible. I know that there's, you know, we've spent some CMAQ funds on locomotive retrofits for locomotives that operate within private yards, but I suspect that we could not make alterations to a private freight yard. But, you know, staff is happy to dig into that as well.
Yeah,
Well,
I guess my only, go ahead. I'm sorry,
Oh,
Jeff.
no, go ahead. You finish up.
Oh, I apologize. My only concern would be, like, there's a lot of eligible improvements that are out there. Like, I'm sure we could sit down and come up with all sorts of stuff that could be eligible that would be one-offs. But, you know, we've really set up the STP share as kind of focused on certain core improvements for the region. There are a lot of other funding opportunities out there for these kind of one-off projects, especially with the new federal infrastructure bill. I don't know what the latest acronym is that we're using for that. It's BIL or IIJA. So it's really easy, I think, to kind of start going down rabbit holes and kind of diluting what we're focusing this program on. And I would just caution against that.
My thought is that, you know, when you start talking about rail yards, you know, how deep of a dive are we going to start to go into this, and is it really something that we should be going into? But we, and on the other hand, though, as you talk about rail yards and how it could affect transportation, you know, you start you know, expanding rail yards or downsizing rail yards. How is that going to affect the rail transportation going through communities? Are that going to increase the time that freight train or commuter train, you know, goes through a town? And my first thought is Barrington, because Karen Dortch is you know, Mayor of Barrington has continually had that problem where, you know, there's 3 or 4 rail lines going through her town, and it just does a bottleneck because, you know, the freight trains are taking 15 to 20 minutes to get through, and it just causes congestion. So I think that maybe we do need to at least take a, you know, maybe an overlook at it, you know, a high level, but, you know, how far into it, you know, should we be doing that? It may not be feasible for us, but I think that we should at least take a look at, you know, how it's going to affect transportation in an overall scope of it.
Agreed.
Well, fantastic. I think what I'm hearing is we will direct staff to go ahead and dig into this project type, see if we think it is appropriate for this fund source, and ask staff to come back. I would say probably the June meeting with some information to present to the committee, and the committee can decide from there if this is something to consider including in the program or not. Any additional comments on project types before we move on from either the committee or from anyone in the audience? All right, well, thank you, Elliot, and all good comments here. Next on our agenda is to do a quick walk through the scoring criteria that are currently used, just to determine which of those criteria this committee wants to discuss more in depth this spring and summer, and which criteria we think are meeting our program goals and really need no further discussion. So I'm going to take this one, put my staff hat on for a minute, and say that, as noted in the packet, we're preparing for what will be our third programming cycle. Through our first 2 cycles, most of our criteria have been successful, we believe, in elevating the projects that do the most in their category to that highest rank. However, we do know there's always room for improvement through refinement of the criteria. The table in the memo in the packet provides the staff comments for each of the criteria, as well as a recommendation for the level of discussion that staff proposes for each in the coming months. Today's staff is seeking confirmation as well as guidance from the committee regarding those recommendations. For the criteria that are recommended for no discussion, staff is not planning to present any changes to the committee. However, if circumstances change as our discussions evolve throughout the spring and summer, we can certainly bring any criteria back for discussion at any time. For the criteria that are recommended for some or significant discussion, staff will allocate time on upcoming meeting agendas to lead those discussions and present recommendations for the committee's consideration. So kind of diving right in the project readiness section of our scoring, the status of phase 2 engineering and land acquisition are considered, along with the sponsor's financial commitments beyond required matching funds. These 2 criteria have really been successful in rewarding projects that are farther along in the implementation process or have secured other funding with additional points. Therefore, beyond continuing to refine the descriptive text for the math behind the financial commitment score, staff really doesn't think that there's needs to be a discussion of these criteria. But before I move on kind of to the next group, does the committee feel any differently about these readiness criteria? All right, well, we can come back at the end. Moving then into the transportation impact portion of our scoring, starting with the jobs and households, which is a criteria that applies to all of the project types. This criterion does a really good job of differentiating between projects that have a greater regional reach and those with a more localized reach. However, we have heard some concerns that this criteria can disadvantage projects that do rank near the top in both need or improvement scoring, but happen to be located in the less densely populated collar counties. Because of these concerns, staff would like to conduct some analyses of the outcomes of the current scoring method and present those results and potential options for adjustments to the committee at a future meeting. Next are the need and improvement scores, which do vary by project type. As we all know, the committee spent a good amount of time developing and refining the scoring for bike ped barriers, bridge projects, transit stations, and truck route improvements last summer. So therefore, staff is not recommending further discussion of those criteria, though we will look to tweak some of the application workbook questions to assist with the scoring process. The same recommendation is being made for bus speed improvement, road expansion, and road construction project types. For rail highway grade crossing improvements, CMAP staff is currently working with our stakeholders to update the underlying data used to develop the 2019 grade crossing priorities. So other than utilizing this updated data, which is expected to be available before the next call for project cycle, staff doesn't think that there's a need for discussion of refining the scoring in this category. In the corridor and small area safety improvements category, the correlation between the safety problem, so what types of crashes are occurring within a corridor, and the scope of the improvements meant to address this problem seems to not always be clear as we're evaluating projects. So exploring ways to strengthen that correlation and better reflect that strength in the scoring method is recommended. Additionally, the need score for safety projects is a bit unique in our scoring structure in that it assigns just 1 of 5 absolute point values rather than a full range of values from 0 to 20 for the need. So this absolute scoring can lead to advantage for projects with the highest safety need that get a 20 right off the bat, and it can lead to a disadvantage for those at the lower end of the scale. So staff wants to kind of dig in and see if we can propose some alternative ways to kind of refine this so that we get a broader scale instead of those absolute point values. So if the committee's comfortable with these recommendations, which would essentially leave the need and improvement scoring for all of the project types except for the safety projects as is, and then go ahead and dig into that safety scoring and see if we can't refine that and have staff bring us something to react to later this summer. Any objection or agreement from the committee?
I have one question and one comment. I think regarding the correlation between, you know, the safety versus the proposed capital improvements, I think that that's a good area to explore. So thank you for doing that. Just one clarification question. You mentioned the highway grade crossing improvements. Is that 2-pager that had like it going up to like UU, like for the potential grade? Okay, so that's going to be updated this year then?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so like would the list be changing or things moving around then? Because I think that was based on congestion, right?
Yeah, it's based on auto delay, train delay, transit delay, safety, gate downtime. So there's, I want to say,
Everything.
yeah,
Okay.
15 or 20 underlying columns in the spreadsheet. So staff has started to work through refining the delay calculations and is starting to schedule discussions with stakeholders before something's presented.
Okay, but that's coming later this year, and that will be by the next cycle. All right, well, we look forward to receiving that too. Thank you.
Of course. Other thoughts on leaving the scoring alone on everything but safety from the committee or from anyone in the audience? All right. Well, hearing none, I'll move on to that next set of scoring, which is our planning factors. The committee made significant changes to both complete streets and freight planning factor scoring methods during our last cycle, and staff believes that those methods and the methods for scoring transit supportive density are effective and need no further discussion. We also believe that as the region continues to strive for equity in our transportation system, the committee should discuss any opportunities to refine our inclusive growth scoring in the shared fund, and also recommends discussion of shifting points from having a green infrastructure policy to inclusion of actual green infrastructure elements into the green infrastructure planning factor scoring, similar to the changes that were made with complete streets last cycle. If the committee agrees, staff will go ahead and schedule discussion of inclusive growth and green infrastructure for future meetings. Any disagreement on that? All right, everybody's shaking heads and smiling. So the last piece of our overall scoring is the sub-regional priority point section. That there continue to be concerns there regarding the subjectivity of this scoring. So, staff does suggest scheduling committee discussion this summer on that. And as mentioned previously, we'll schedule a discussion about incorporating sustainability, I have trouble with that word, and or resilience into the overall methodology, and about ways in which we can include electric vehicle infrastructure within the scope of our scoring as well. So those are our staff's recommendations: to schedule discussion on jobs and household scoring, safety project scoring, inclusive growth and green infrastructure planning factors, sub-regional priorities, and electric vehicle infrastructure and resilience. Are there any other scoring criteria that any members of the committee would like staff to investigate over the next couple months?
I think between the 20+ competitive programs that are coming down with the new federal bill and, the focus areas on this list, I know the team will have its hands full at CMAP. So I thank you all in advance for your efforts, for the staff listening on this meeting, for, helping bring some of these nuances to light so that we can, look at the scoring and understand it a little bit better than we have in the past.
Well, thank you. I will pass that on to the rest of the team that isn't on the call. All right, well, you know, the scheduling of these topics doesn't preclude discussion of anything else anytime throughout the year, but staff will go ahead and set up that framework for our discussions over the next couple of meetings. So moving on to our next item agenda, which is other business. Does anyone have any other business they would like to discuss for the good of the committee?
Kama, this is Mary. I just want to recognize that John Donovan joined much earlier on in the meeting, and that'll be captured in the attendance.
Thank you, Mary. All right, hearing no other business, is there any public comment? We did not receive anything prior to today's meeting, and I don't see anything in the chat. But if anyone in attendance today would like to make public comment, I would invite you to unmute and again, let us know who you are and what your comment is. All right, well, seeing and hearing no other comments, I'm doing a bad job with my slides here. All right, our next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, April 14th at 9:30 a.m. When that date draws closer, we'll be reaching out to the committee if there's a possibility for an in-person meeting. I suspect based on what the governor announced yesterday, maybe we will be able to get to an in-person meeting by April, but we'll also hold on to this go-to meeting link as well. I think at that next meeting, based on what we talked about today, we'll probably expect to discuss a little bit more about rail yards, the refinements to planning factor scoring, and also need to circle back on phase 1 engineering requirements, which needs to be discussed by the CMAC committee as well. So if there's no other business, I will go ahead and entertain a motion to adjourn.
So move, Rockingham.
Okay, is there a second?
Gallagher seconds.
All right, and for adjournment, we just need a voice vote. So all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All right, any opposed? All right, hearing none, the meeting is adjourned at 10:25 a.m. Thank you, everyone.
Have a good day, everyone.